There you go. Can you see as I flick through?
Yeah, I've got it up here as well. So
right. So do you want me to cover off the first one?
Yeah, we can do an introduction and then we're just going to talk through it.
I've just admitted someone, just so you know.
Excellent.
Someone else coming in. Okay, so anyone who's not speaking, can you please put your microphone off, please?
Yeah.
We'll go to the first slide, Malcolm. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to present the work of the Financial Impact Action Group as part of the work that we've been doing in partnership with the Mental Health Cluster. I'm joined here today by Malcolm Ferry from Citizen Advice Jersey, and also Jenny. Is Jenny there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Jenny, from our adult mental health team. And really today we're going to give you a run through of what we've done since the pandemic started. And there's a big focus, as you've seen, on working together across the voluntary sector, parishes and government to deal with the immediate health response. But aside from that, there was a lot of issues around finance, around housing and general anxiety and mental health. And so this next sort of 30 minutes will give you an overview of just what work has been done and the level of participation and partnerships which has actually seen us work together in probably a different way than we have in the past to support vulnerable islanders. And as we head to the autumn into the winter and we start to see cases increase, etc., that partnership working is going to be vital, not just to deal with the COVID winter, but also any potential negative impact which results in Brexit in the new year. So I'll hand over to Malcolm to give an initial overview. There'll be an opportunity for any questions at the end. So we hope you enjoy the next 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Just put your thumb up if you can, Jenny. You can hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the Community Task Force was born out of the necessity to respond to the emerging health crisis that came from COVID-19. And of course, we were aware right from the beginning of the potential financial impacts and the subsequent impacts on people's mental health because of COVID-19. So what we assembled in really short order is a group of people, which was just a small group of civil servants, charitable representation, and people from government itself to come together and thrash out what could be made available in the form of support for people who were going to be vulnerable during this time. So it was fair to say that I was extracted from my job and seconded to the government for a short period of time to help with the volunteer side of the Community Task Force. So we had political support in the form of the Community Task Force Steering Group, and our day-to-day work also fed into the OneGov COVID team, which did some fantastic work during the whole of the pandemic. So our main brief was to make sure that people who needed food could have food, make sure that people who were lonely, isolated, or having to self-isolate didn't need to go out of their homes, and that they could have the necessary things brought to their door. So during a short time of between 6 to 8 weeks, we set up a centralised food bank through the Salvation Army. We set up digital vouchers to keep people connected to the internet. We set up money that was turned into electricity vouchers to make sure that people didn't lose connectivity to the electricity supply. Because lots of vulnerable clients are on pay-as-you-go meters, and unfortunately, once they trip over a more than a £5 debit, they automatically shut down. So there were some quite big concerns there. Look, on the plus side, we were aware that we were coming into the summer months. You know, there was still a lot of positivity, a lot of goodwill about, and we were able to harness that goodwill and that volunteer effort through the great work of volunteer.je, who helped to pull together that support and start to direct it into the right areas. So I think the biggest thing that we faced as a group was our definition of vulnerable people suddenly became a lot wider than the traditional definition of vulnerable was, because, you know, we could envisage a 21-year-old male, as an example, in a flat on his own, who might be a finance worker and actually not be financially vulnerable at all, but because they were self-isolating, they could be put in a very, very vulnerable situation. So we had to reach out to a much wider group of people than we ever had in the past. And our links with the parishes was such an important and vital part of that work. I think the whole parish system really drove into action and showed its support for the community. And the best bit about the parishes is they've got a deep understanding of their parishioners' needs, but they've also got the ability to be fleet of foot and to respond in any way that they could to the other vulnerable groups of people that were suddenly within their parishes. One of the biggest and best links that we had was with the community advisory group. This had been set up for the previous 2 years and was facilitated by the police. And it brings together faith communities and LGBT communities and charities and government to again work together towards one common purpose. So we had a great group there that was set up that really started to show its worth. So where we traditionally had meetings on the community advisory group once a quarter, that was moved forward to once a week. And of course it was a virtual meeting, but that proved so valuable in keeping those connections with those minority groups and other vulnerable groups right at the forefront of everything that we did. Okay, so I'll go on to the next slide, Paul.
Well, I was just, if we just go back one, Malcolm, I was just going to explain the membership of the, so as Malcolm's alluded to, the Community Task Force, one of the legacies from the Community Task Force was indeed the Financial Impact Action Group. And this was established in July with the responsibility of monitoring the impact on individuals and the community's finances, employment, and crucially mental health, and making that link between all of those areas. In terms of the membership, the representation is quite diverse. It's Caritas, it's Christians Against Poverty, Citizens Advice Jersey, the Salvation Army, the Grace Trust, the Parish of St Helier, Community Savings Limited, Mind Jersey, as well as government representatives from community and local services, children's services, strategic planning and performance, as well as health and community services. And I just wonder if it's now, Jenny, if you just want to come in and just give a quick overview of how you found that work in terms of linking the mental health aspect of into the work that many of our fantastic charities do.
Hello, yes, it was excellent because it meant that linking in meant that we could connect individuals that we work with in mental health services. We could make that connection quicker, and therefore the support that individual required, we could hopefully get that quicker by us linking together ourselves. That linked our services, which then impacted down on the individuals that needed that support. So I do think that this has been extremely helpful. You know, just by us being able to see what's available as well, and through the more speed more than anything for the person who needs, you know, some help with finances or some advice around finances, because often, you know, people present to mental health services and it may be that they don't require a secondary mental health service, but what they might require is just a bit of advice and some signposting. So by our services finding out more about the other services around, we're able to do that signposting more effectively as well.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So we can move on to what we started to see in terms of trends emerging. So in terms of it, what we established was basically a group who would monitor what they were seeing on the ground. So we had a live update as to what was happening, what our community was telling us, so we could feed that into a political oversight group, and also, as Jenny's alluded to share resources and expertise, and also be rapid in how that happens. So in terms of some of the trends, and I'll ask colleagues to jump in, we saw there was definitely an anxiety about the future, and this was both in terms of future prospects, but also the threat of a second lockdown and the impact that could have on people's mental health and well-being. There was obviously an anxiety around the economy and unemployment and all that brings with it, and that came out strongly. There was a use of food banks and fuel vouchers that did subside significantly over the summer months, but has started to creep up again, and we're starting to monitor that on a regular basis. General financial concerns were also reported, and this was on the basis that some islanders who maybe had 2 or 3 jobs, to see them over the winter months, potentially because of lockdown and because of the restrictions, were concerned about how they would get through the autumn and winter months. So there was also that, and also rent arrears and other financial pressures. Our colleagues within SIPES reported an increase in children's mental health concerns. And we did see over the first wave of the pandemic some significant issues around housing and homelessness. And Malcolm, I know this is something that, from a CAB perspective, you've really got your sort of ear to the ground and understanding. But at one stage, I think we had up to an extra 70 people who we needed to find accommodation for.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. So there was some anxiety around people who had been housed in temporary accommodation, how they were going to fit when that temporary accommodation came to an end. You know, luckily, that lots of those people were either decided that, you know, Jersey wasn't working out for them because they can't come at the beginning of the year, or they were able to get new accommodation and in fact find new employment, because whilst the unemployment figures peaked initially, as one would expect, what we found fairly quickly was that those figures started to come down and people were able to get some sort of employment or get the support that they needed through the income support scheme. So there was still a small amount of people, which was, you know, as far as the shelter trust goes, it is, you know, more than they're used to seeing. But there is additional temporary accommodation which is available to that trust in order to house people who need it on an emergency basis. Then there's an even smaller group of people who are homeless in normal times, if you like, and you know that group of people are very difficult to house in any sort of permanent way, because there are some people, certainly in the summer months, who choose to not go into a shelter because they prefer to be outside where there's less restrictions on what they consider to be the, you know, the activities that they want to do. Obviously, with winter coming along, that doesn't happen. That's not so prevalent, and they tend to go back into the shelter. So the shelter is well placed at the moment to maintain what they're doing at the moment. You know, we sincerely hope that, you know, there's no future lockdown where we might have to reinvigorate those strategies. But if that does happen, we're well placed to do that again, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. I think it's fair to say that the influx, perhaps with people who'd come to work this season and found themselves in a very difficult position. I think it's also worth pointing out that there was some media reports yesterday that could be up to 100 people homeless or rough sleeping in Jersey. I've had correspondence from the Shelter Trust that they would challenge that, and actually they've got capacity if islanders need to access emergency accommodation. So I would echo that. Some of the other issues that we picked up And again, I think that the benefit of having this group was it wasn't just one organisation, it was right across the board, seeing different islanders, was around relationship breakdowns. And we did see over the pandemic, sadly, an increase in domestic violence, but also concerns around relationships and the strains of people living in close proximity and the challenges that brought about. And I just wonder, Jenny, if you could come in on that issue and the impact that has. And also one of the big issues was around isolation and loneliness.
Well, I guess if you think about mental health and levels of mental distress, I like to think about it from a social perspective. So all of these things such as social isolation, relationship dynamics, they all have an impact upon our well-being. And I guess having lockdown is not a usual situation for any of us. So for perhaps, you know, everybody's having to deal with this different situation, and that has put a strain on relationships. In some circumstances, not all, in a lot of circumstances. And it may be where there may have been some difficulties anyway that may have impacted further. The fact that, you know, people got concerned perhaps about their employment, about finances and other things, that then impacts on relationships and then on people's mental well-being. And isolation and loneliness, you know, if somebody's feeling low and perhaps they've got no one to talk to, and then lockdown meant that perhaps they couldn't go out. There was at one point it was 2 hours people were allowed out for, you know, and then the rest of the time sitting at home alone. That can have a massive impact on people's well-being as well. So I think, and then that in turn sometimes leads to anxiety around the future, anxiety around, you know, around COVID itself, and then anxiety around what's going to happen in the future, anxiety if people are apart from their relatives, when are they going to see their relatives? So all of that has an impact on mental well-being, and you know, and I think people, fortunately, so people were reaching out and asking for help. And so us having this group together again has helped with signposting people and just being able to give advice, you know, because that loneliness and isolation and I guess not knowing when the COVID situation is going to end is just really difficult for a lot of people.
Thank you, Jenny. That's really helpful. I think one of the other areas that we picked up on was as we moved to this sort of remote world of Skyping, and we've all got used to it and so on, is understanding that for some people, internet connectivity is a challenge, and it is a costly way to keep in touch. But thankfully, Malcolm, there was support from the sector to support islanders.
There was, Paul, and what happened is when I was on the task force, I was contacted by numerous philanthropists who really wanted to do something for the community, had money, but didn't know how that would be best placed and targeted in the most appropriate way. So one of those philanthropists made a sum of money available, which we managed to turn into digital vouchers, so that people who are at risk of falling behind in their payment for their internet services, or indeed being disconnected because they were so far in arrears, we were able to plug that gap by getting digital vouchers to those people and making sure that they didn't lose internet connectivity, particularly during that lockdown period. Because at the time, of course, there was no way of getting free Wi-Fi. So many people who live on a shoestring and need internet connectivity go to a cafe, go to a public space and pick up that Wi-Fi. There was no way of doing that. So thankfully, with that scheme, we were able to turn £10,000 into digital vouchers, which saved so many people from getting disconnected. And the benefits, of course, is as we came out of lockdown and they were able to get back to work, they weren't in arrears with their internet bills. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Malcolm. If we can just go to the next slide, if that's possible. So we've talked about some of the issues that came up, but I think we need to also be aware of the positives. So in terms of the Financial Impact Action Group's findings that we've just touched upon, what we've seen collectively is an amazing amount of local resilience. We've seen all sectors working together, sharing information, being proactive. The CRESS scheme has protected people, and again, that was the feedback that we had from providers. We have seen support for charities through funders, and we have seen great strength across our community. And again, I think we also need to be aware that there's so much good activity that goes on that doesn't get recognised. You know, Malcolm just alluded to the digital vouchers there. There's been thousands of acts of generosity, kindness, the 3,500 people who volunteered to help the community, the people who volunteered at food banks, who helped distribute meals. Right across the community, there's been strength and resilience, which I think is central and core to the makeup of this fantastic community in Ireland. And Malcolm and Jerry, I'll leave it to you to add there, but I think what we've seen is adversity in a really difficult situation where people have actually triumphed and come over these very big challenges.
Yeah, I always think, you know, a crisis such as this kind of brings out the best and the worst in people. But what we've seen is by far and above the best in people. I think when you sometimes don't see the best in people, it's because they're in an incredibly stressful situation themselves. And when I got back to Citizens Advice after the task force work, I found that there was a different flavour, there was a different feeling from our clients. And some of it was manifesting itself as confusion, as anger, as stress, as mental health issues. But, you know, when you think it's totally not to be expected that that was going to happen. But what we were able to do was to allay those fears by telling them that there were so many good people over here that have pulled together to support the community and make sure that no one gets left behind. And when you can have that gentle conversation with people and they realise and recognise that they're not on their own, that there is the help, there is the support, and we can demonstrate how that's happening in real time, I think that gives people a lot of comfort. Jenny?
Yes, and I think in terms of, you know, mental health services and how we have linked with other services, much the same as this with the Financial Impact Assessment Group, there have been other groups, you know, that have set up, and it's that linking and that collaborative working together has really, I think it's really come to the fore during this COVID period, and so this is something that we've seen, and you know, from my point of view, would be great to carry on because we've really made those links around the system, which are really helpful.
Jenny, that's really helpful. Thank you, Malcolm, as well. So again, there's been a lot of strength. So I think that leads us nicely onto our sort of final slide of this morning, or this lunchtime. The group has continued to meet. Initially, we met every week. We've now moved to fortnightly. We wanted to keep that going because we anticipated that with winter, etc., there may be additional challenges, and we didn't want to have to start from scratch. So where we are as today, we're in a position where if we needed to up the support that's required, we would be in a position to do so across the government and especially of our key partners in the voluntary sector and also of the parishes. So our immediate priorities are a COVID-19 winter. What's the impact? We know that there's obviously an increase in cases. We know that there's anxiety, but we also know that the winter always brings additional health challenges that we see on a yearly basis. So how can we best do that? How can we best make sure that people who maybe it's difficult and harder to reach are having their flu vaccinations, are receiving the support? And that's where, as Malcolm alluded to, working with the community advisory group, where we've got links into different communities across the island, means that we can get messages both into the Financial Impact Action Group and out as well. I think there's a concern around isolation. Isolation isn't just a COVID phenomenon. This is something which we deal with, and as an island, and in the community, I think we need to address not just during COVID, but in the longer term. And I know, Jenny, that's something which you've got some grave concerns about how we tackle that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do need to tackle isolation and look at how we do that. I mean, certainly in the UK, when I worked in the UK, there was some other services that got involved. Like I know the fire service got involved with that in the UK, but I do understand that, Jersey is Jersey. So but I do think that isolation, social isolation, particularly in the winter and particularly with Christmas looming, this is going to be a very different Christmas for some people who may have had, visitors from elsewhere that they usually spend Christmas with, or maybe they usually, go off somewhere else to spend their Christmas. So I think it's looking at all of that this year. It's going to be very different for a lot of people.
And again, I think one of the things which people look forward to is the events that the parishes put on every year, their Christmas events, the likes of Age Concern and many others. And again, because of the current restrictions, that's going to be more difficult. But I do know that people are looking at inventive ways of continuing to support people. I know that Mind are looking at how they can provide peer support to people over 65. So there is lots of work going out there. And I think the message is, if people want support, please get in touch with Jenny, Malcolm, myself, Paul McGinnity, and we can go from there. There's also concern, I think, around the unknown second wave and shielding. And again, that's something where we would link with the community task force to make sure that we're able to support people with food and with other supplies. And I think then the other is trying to measure the impact in scale of where we're going. It's quite a difficult place to be, because to try and see where we're going to be in 6, 12, 18 months is quite difficult. But I think the message, and Malcolm, I'm sure you'll concur, is that collectively we've been well prepared, and it's that community spirit and that preparedness that will help us deal with emerging themes and issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to concerns, of course, we do have to keep them in context. So measuring the scale of the emerging themes is really important as well, because this is, while we have these financial impact action group meetings every 2 weeks, which we're looking at the rhythm of those meetings, it's important that we keep it in perspective, and we can share that amongst us. So whilst one organisation might be seeing a particular group of people that are affected, firstly, we need to find the solutions for those groups of people, but also to keep it in perspective, so that the same story doesn't get told 5 times and appear to be 5 times the problem. So it's important that we get to the root of what the story is, the root of what the problem is, and then we can deal with it in the most appropriate way. Of course, people have concerns, but when people are stressed, sometimes those concerns perhaps seem bigger than they actually are. One thing that kept us going through lockdown was that continual mantra of, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We knew it was going to be a long term, and we paced ourselves accordingly, and we measured out the support which was consummate to the level of need. Paul?
Yeah, I would agree, Malcolm. I think, it's easy to look at other jurisdictions. I think we're in a fortunate place. That there's lots of support available, and understanding the needs and prioritising the support is going to be paramount. But again, as much as some organisations have seen it increase, there's others who've actually said that they've got more quiet, which has been quite an interesting phenomenon. Again, the other issues that we want to be mindful of, and we really hope we don't get to this, is any potential lockdown during the winter months. And Jenny, in terms of mental health impact, the previous sort of lockdown restrictions came when we were having quite a glorious spring and summer. Obviously, there would be different challenges if we were over the winter months.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so the message I want to send around that really is, if anyone's feeling anxious or worried or isolated, please ask for help, because you know, that we've got all these services around us. I'm sure between us we can signpost or get you some kind of support. I mean, the winter, as you say, a potential lockdown in the winter brings different, you know, more issues as well, around, you know, we usually make preparation for flu season in the winter as well. So we've got that, but we are looking at winter planning across our services anyway, and that will take into consideration any preparation for COVID as well.
Thank you, Jenny. And I suppose the other issue is any longer-term social and financial impacts further down the line. But again, I think that's something which, looking at fiscal stimulus and other measures that have been put in place, and I think collectively, the Financial Impact Action Group, I feel that we've done well as a community, and it's how we continue that and how we are responsive to needs moving forward, working collectively. So I think that gives a flavour of the work that we've done and the partners who've engaged. Again, pulling everybody together. Everybody wants the same outcome to support vulnerable islanders and to give the best future possible. Obviously, it's intrinsically linked between physical and mental health. And again, as part of our proposed care model, aligning that and having parity of esteem it's imperative that we do that, but also making sure that we have respect and links with all of our voluntary sector partners who are a significant partner in supporting our community. So I think, unless Jenny, Malcolm, you have anything further to add, we can open up to if anybody has any questions about the presentation or any of the issues that we've touched upon.
Don't forget, anyone who's there is on mute. You can unmute and ask a question if you like. No? Okay. All that I'd like to add, Paul, is that, you know, this has been a difficult time for the island, but it's been a time where, you know, I've made more, better, stronger connections than probably ever before in my last 10 years of working here. And it's really encouraging that those connections are going to continue in a different format and be prepared for whatever comes down the road next. We're prepared for it. We will meet the threat in the same way that we did in the first instance, and I think we're well prepared as an island.
Thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, Jenny, and I'd like to thank Simba and Martin for the opportunity to do this. Again, hopefully the recording can be put out, and I'm sure that we'll use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.